Natasha is a doctoral research fellow examining the Victorial visceral novel reader in a project which is being funded by the German Research Foundation at the Johannes Gutenberg University of Mainz in Germany. She participated in the Institute for World Literature 2019 at Harvard, and she co-organised in 2020 the virtual international workshop Connecting the Dots, Conceptualising Trace in the Nexus of Novels and Readers' Sensory Imaginings. She's published articles in the Journal of European Periodical Studies and book reviews for the European Journal of American Studies. Her current research focus is fiction by Thomas Hardy, the Bronte sisters, and Henry James. And her paper today is called Sensory Sympathy, Shared Experiences of Embodiment in Tess of the D'Urbervilles.
I want to thank the Thomas Hardy Society for organizing this great annual study day dedicated to Tess of the D'Urbervilles, and for offering me the opportunity to speak to you virtually today. My name is Natasha Anderson, and I work as a doctoral research fellow at the Johannes Gutenberg University Mainz in Germany. In a project funded by the German Research Foundation, I examined the Victorian visceral novel reader. In my presentation, Sensory Sympathy, Shared Experiences of Embodiment in Tess of the D'Urbervilles, we will explore engaging aspects of somatic perception. Delving into a world of intrigues, immorality, and immersive descriptions, readers continue to be captured by Thomas Hardy's novel, in part due to the narrative activation of embodiment. This approach draws upon the prior research of scholars such as Marco Caracciolo, whose 2014 monograph, The Experientiality of Narrative, details how literary references to the body affect the audience. Multisensory descriptions serve as the most elementary and enthralling tool of literary engagement for the reader within the narrative. According to the theory of the prominent French philosopher of phenomenology, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, the living body not only filters but also enables and creates sensory-motor experience. Today, we will examine how literary depictions of bodily perceptions and motions in relation to characters' interactions can visually impact the audience. This presentation is part of a longer paper, scheduled for review for publication. Therefore, I kindly ask for my presentation not to be shared or uploaded on servers open to the general public, such as YouTube. The reader's embodied participation in Hardy's novel occurs through a threefold process. This includes partaking in imagined kinesthetic navigation, in characters' somatic perspectives, and in reciprocal observation of bodily actions between characters. In the first instance, the audience is invited to explore the landscape as if capable of walking in the narrative space during panoramic descriptions of the rural environment. Second of all, the audience vicariously participates in a number of physical activities alongside the protagonist, including horseback riding, milking cows, and strolling. Finally, the depiction of corporeal activities can combine various viewpoints by alternating from one character's sensory discernments to another's somatic sensations. Starting with kinesthetic navigation, the rural scene of Hardy's Wessex comes to life through a pedestrian perspective. Readers are led along hills and dales, along babbling brooks, and into mist-shrouded forests. The sensori-motor details of these travels immerse the reader in Hardy's novel. For instance, the Vale of Blackmoor, where Tess D'Urberville's village of Marlett lies, presents to the audience difficulties of traversing the landscape on foot with the warning, an unguided ramble into its recesses in bad weather is apt to engender dissatisfaction with its narrow, tortuous, and miry ways. Hardy's writing leaves a place for the audience to enter and vicariously partake in imagined muscular movement. The audience also shares the sensations of a visitor who is rewarded by setting out in more amiable atmospheric conditions. The traveler from the coast who, after plodding northward for a score of miles over calcareous downs and cornlands, suddenly reaches the verge of one of these escarpments, is surprised and delighted to behold, extended like a map beneath him, a country differing absolutely from that which he has passed through. The fields are mere paddocks, so reduced that from this height their hedgerows appear a network of dark green threads. The evocative descriptions of the leisurely amble through the landscape connects to the research of French philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty. His phenomenological theories help us gauge the interaction between physical movement and sensory perception. Merleau-Ponty draws upon the research of Henri Vallon to assert that the body's motion forms an essential element of observing the world. He writes that a collaboration between a consciousness of my body's position in space, corrective reflexes, and consciousness of the spatiality of my body, all this is necessary for perception. In descriptions of rural rambles in Tess of the D'Urbervilles, readers enact this principle as they follow the sweep of embodied attention. Several senses work in tandem to complete the sensorimotor experience, as the audience is vicariously involved in walking up a slope or beholding a view from atop a hill. During the novel's multiple travels and travails, comparative accounts create an expanding navigational sense. At Talbothays Dairy, walking merges with odors and sights of fertile fields, while Tess works there for a few blissful months. Somatic descriptions of balmy summer nights envelop the reader in sensations of the surrounding building's heat. The house fronts, the barton walls, were warm as hearths, and reflected the noontide temperature into the noctambulist's face. Such descriptions of strolling during the mild twilight hours form a sharp contrast to the intense cold of later scenes. For instance, some months later, when Tess walks barefoot at night across a stone bridge in early January to lead her sleepwalking husband home, the reader gains a tactile appreciation of the icy slabs underfoot. This mix of impressions recreates the sensation of ambling across Hardy's Wessex terrain in all seasons. As to the second aspect of our model, readers partake in the protagonist's physical activities as she navigates rural labor and leisure. Already in the opening scene, Tess is introduced while in constant motion. The reader first comes across her when she walks through the town with the other women of Marlet, and later dances in the annual May Day celebrations. Merleau-Ponty argues that dancing activates corporeality, since it is the body which catches and comprehends movement. Understanding motions thus occurs through the body. However, following the fatal roadside accident one morning that kills her family's horse and sends Tess on a collision course with the rake Alec d'Urberville, the heroine displays a heightened sensitivity of perception as the least irregularity of motion startled her. This rising distrust of movement plagues her while seated beside Alec on his dog-cart. The rapid pace makes her uneasy at a certain recklessness in her conductor's driving. Tess's control of her own corporeality is wrested from her through Alec's actions that cause the young woman to lose her sense of safety and balance on the unsteady dog-cart. Even when Tess leaves such breakneck speeds behind in favor of the slower motions at Talbothays Dairy, Her actions draw the audience's attention to her bodily presence and perceptions. Her activities are outlined in sensory detail, such as when she presses her forehead into the flank of a cow while milking, and the sun paints her profile across the animal's side. The reader similarly ventures to share her somatic awareness of her own body. For example, when a dizzying swell of happiness overcomes her during the sunlit days of Angel Claire's courtship, every seesaw of her breath, every wave of her blood, every pulse singing in her ears, compels her to accept his proposal. This description delineates interoception, or the awareness focusing on sensations from organs and tissues within the body, rather than sensory perceptions of external stimuli. The emphasis on interoception in Tess of the D'Urbervilles lets the force of the heroine's pulse and breath gain almost the force of movement, as the sensations within her skin are compared to palpitating, rhythmic motions. Even at the nadir of mobility, when Tess seeks rest, a fluidity of sensory stimuli permeates her perceptions. For instance, while employed in the harsh working environment of Flintcomb Ash, the approaching winter weather exposes her and the involved reader to biting winds, stinging rain, and drenched clothes. When she lies down in an onrush of fatigue while redrawing, Tess lets surrounding sounds wash over her. She lay in a state of percipience without volition, and the rustle of the straw and the cutting of the ears by the others had the weight of bodily touches. The protagonist's discernments thus blur together in this state of exhaustion. Finally, Hardy's novel invites the audience to shift between different characters' embodied perceptions. The merging of perspectives accompanies Tess and her future husband Angel from their first bloom of romance to sickness during their separation. In the early summer months of their courtship, Tess and Angel appear to one another as luminous in the morning twilight as they crossed the fog-shrouded fields to gather the cows for milking. The scene begins with Angel's observations before shifting to the protagonist's viewpoint. Whilst all the landscape was in neutral shade, his companion's face, which was the focus of his eyes, rising above the mist stratum, seemed to have a sort of phosphorescence upon it. In reality, her face, without appearing to do so, had caught the cold gleam of day from the northeast. His own face, though he did not think of it, wore the same aspect to her. The subtle play of the sun's first rays upon their visages mirrors the gentle fluctuation between their views of one another. Sympathy arises through such shared experiences, since embodiment serves as a basis of commonality. As a result, Angel's rejection of Tess is all the more discordant to readers, who witness successfully both his and her corporeal perspectives. A similarity of embodied experiences connecting Tess and Angel prevails despite their separation. While the heroine stumbles into increasingly dire circumstances during her search for employment, Angel, half a world away, encounters no better luck, as the reader finds him lying ill of fever in the clay lands near Curitiba in Brazil. He returns to England a mere yellow skeleton, marked by malady and prematurely aged, just as Tess's health and vigor are worn away when she accepts Alec d'Urberville's proposal to live together to support her family. Upon reuniting once again, heroine and husband mirror one another in appearance. Tess is so pale, so breathless, so quivering in every muscle after she kills Alec with a dagger through the heart, whereas Angel's sickly face has become worn and unhandsome following his illness-plagued voyages. The couple's complexions not only testify similarities in their waning health, but also complement their unified movement as they futilely flee to elude punishment for Tess's crime. Tess and her husband's final walk together leads them to Stonehenge, which they perceive through its acoustic presence in the dark. The wind playing upon the edifice produced a booming tune like the note of some gigantic one-stringed harp. The reader accompanying their perception also receives auditory details before identifying the contours of the ancient edifice. Just as the philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty states that a pedestrian proceeding to a site will initially only have impressions that all at once assemble into a unified whole, so does the experience of advancing alongside Tess and Angel allow the senses to act directly upon the audience. In sum, Thomas Hardy's novel enables the audience to switch between several somatic perspectives, from active movement to involuntary breathing to a consolidation of senses, and thereby partake in multiple individuals' perspectives. This shifting between three versions of embodied participation draws readers' attention to how different aspects of bodily awareness together create an amalgamation of sensorimotor perception in Tess of the D'Urbervilles. Thank you for your attention. I wish all of you a pleasant experience at the Thomas Hardy Society Study Day.